May 1985, the last Saturday of the football season. Birmingham City had already done their job, promotion secured, a return to Division 1, the very top tier of English football. The visitors, Leeds United, still had something to play for too. A slim, flickering chance of promotion themselves if they won here and results elsewhere went their way. But anyone who knew English football in the mid-80s knew something very different was coming, because this wasn't just Birmingham versus Leeds, this was the Zulus versus the service crew, and police had already caught wind of something big brewing. Steve Burrows was a young constable at the time. A few days before the match, he was sent to Sheldon Police Station to pick up some paperwork. By pure chance, he bumped into the football intelligence officer, who quietly dropped a bombshell. He asked me if I was working the match on Saturday, then he told me there was going to be trouble because they'd heard Leeds fans were planning to try and stop the game if their team was losing. Worse still, Burrows was then told something that made his stomach sink. He said the gaffers didn't believe the intelligence, they were being cost conscious. They'd put the operational support unit over at West Brom versus Arsenal instead. So, on the afternoon of May 11th, 1985, Steve Burrows found himself sitting in the railway end, surrounded by just a handful of officers. I looked around at the cops scattered in the seats and remember thinking, this could be an interesting afternoon. He had no idea how right he was, because nobody yet knew that before the sun went down, hundreds would be injured, a teenage boy would be dead, and football would be forced to look at itself in the mirror. On the very same day, it was watching people burn alive in Bradford on live television. Two disasters, one afternoon, one sport losing control. This is football's darkest day. By late morning, Leeds fans were already pouring into Birmingham by train, spilling out of New Street Station and straight into the pubs around the city centre. Pints were being pulled, songs were being sung, and everyone knew where this was heading, because only a few hundred yards away, the Zulu warriors were already mobilising. One of their main targets was a pub called the Australian Bar on Her Street. Inside were around 30 Leeds supporters, mixed in with a dozen or so unlucky regulars who'd wandered into the wrong place at the wrong time. The Zulus weren't just one gang, they were a loose federation of smaller crews, each with their own name and reputation. There was the Sauce Force, the Brew Crew, and most feared of all, the Junior Business Boys, around 60 teenagers, some as young as 14, already hardened, already violent, and, on that day, allegedly tooled up. Inside the Australian Bar, the We Are Leeds chant started, and that was all the invitation the Zulus needed. Unable to draw them into the street, the mob turned on the building itself. Windows shattered, glass sprayed across the floor, furniture was ripped out and hurled back through the smashed frames like missiles. The bar was ripped apart, several £1,000s worth of damage in minutes. A few people were injured, nothing life-threatening, but this was only the beginning. By kickoff, St Andrews was a pressure cooker. Around 6,000 Leeds fans had been packed into the Tilton Road corner, sealed behind 12-foot fencing, effectively a human enclosure. It quickly became obvious the space was too small. Too many bodies, not enough exits. If something went wrong, if panic ensued, a crush could easily occur. Paul Ashworth was there that day and remembers the first signs he saw of trouble. Some Leeds fans were sat on the refreshment bar to get a better view. There was an announcement over the tannoy asking for them to get down. More fans got up, another announcement saying it wasn't safe and it would collapse. Again more got up, the police came round to try pull them down, but when their hands got on the roof, they were quickly stamped on. They started jumping on the roof to break it and eventually got inside. Everything was looted and thrown to the fans below. The wooden bits of the walls were thrown onto the pitch. They were throwing the roof tiles like frisbees at the city fans. On the other side of the ground, in the railway end, sat Birmingham's family enclosure. Mums, dads, kids, scarves, innocents, and no fence. PC Steve Burrows, watching it all unfold, began to see faces in the crowd that he recognized. Zulus, right there in the family enclosure. I gradually realized they'd planned their way into the one end of the ground that had no fence at all. I believe the day's events were orchestrated between the Zulu warriors and the Leeds fans in advance. The first warning came at half-time. A small pitch invasion led from the railway end, missiles flying, police scrambling, order eventually restored. What followed would make it look like a playground scrap. When the final whistle blew, Birmingham had won 1-0 and all hell broke loose. From the railway end, a mass of Birmingham hooligans surged forward, armed with anything they could get their hands on. Broken plastic seats, iron stanchions, advertisement boards, planks of wood, glass bottles, even a kettle that they'd liberated from the refreshment stand earlier. They charged towards the Leeds end, straight through the coppers, which by this time included 7 mounted units. Within seconds, the police were fighting on two fronts. One officer was dragged into the Birmingham crowd and beaten unconscious. Another was smashed in the face by a 4-foot plank of wood and hospitalized. Others suffered broken noses, fractured ribs, broken hands, and cracked kneecaps. Horses were cut and pulled to the ground. The pitch had become a battlefield. Steve Markey was just 16 years old at the time. He remembers, the whole day was absolutely mental. Leeds passed down a concrete girder over their heads to try and ram the fence down to get on the pitch. All of a sudden, Blues charged out of the railway end towards the Tilton, only to be met by police, truncheons smashing anyone near. Absolute carnage backwards and forwards for what seemed like ages. I remember a lad with a hoof mark across his face. Blues had played up every away game that season, so I heard a few firms were in attendance. Neil Barker added, "I was there that day, got nicked in the ground, they took us all to a room and locked us in, but we all climbed out of a little window only to get nicked again an hour later, got 6 months in Winson Green, good times." At 5:20 p.m, Birmingham manager Ron Saunders was rushed to the PA system. His voice echoed across the chaos, "Please, go home." It did nothing. The mob surged again, hurling missiles at police, forcing terrified horses to buck and rear. Saunders tried again. "In the name of football, please stop." But words couldn't stop this. Only force could. Mounted police led one final charge, batons swinging, hooves pounding, and slowly, brutally, the riot began to break. Even then, a flare was fired at the police line. Inspector Des Turner, who led the charge, later said, "Luckily it missed us. If that flare had gone into the stands, we could have had another Bradford on our hands." You see, at the exact same time this riot was happening, a fire was raging at Valley Parade. 56 spectators would lose their lives, and at least 265 were injured in the blaze. And because of this tragedy, what happened next at St Andrews went largely underreported. A 12-foot wall in the away section, weakened by crushing crowd pressure, suddenly gave way. A thick cloud of dust exploded into the air as tons of masonry came crashing down. Many people blamed the police, as witnesses claimed they charged the Leeds fans as they were trying to leave the stadium, pressing them against the wall and ultimately causing it to collapse. Beneath it stood Ian Hambridge, a 15-year-old Leeds fan who was attending his first ever match. He was presumed to be sheltering from the chaos inside. After being separated from his 4 friends, the wall fell directly onto him. He suffered catastrophic head injuries and was rushed to Smethwick Neurological Hospital, where he died a few hours later. Deaths at 2 different football stadiums on the very same day. Despite this, chaos continued to spread across Small Heath and Digbeth like a wildfire. An ambulance was attacked with bricks as it tried to reach the injured. At least a dozen first aiders were hurt. A coach carrying Birmingham guests home from an Indian wedding was ambushed by around 200 Leeds fans. Bricks smashed through its windows. 5 people were injured. Mobs streamed into the city centre, throwing bricks at cars, police, anything that moved. Shops were looted, hospitals overflowed. When all was said and done, over 500 people injured, over 100 arrests, and one young boy who would never make it home. During the inquiry that followed, Mr. Justice Oliver Popplewell summed up that day in words that still echo. "It was more like the Battle of Agincourt than a football match." Whatever it was, May 11th, 1985 has to go down as one of the darkest days in football history.